Greetings, Confessors. There is a lot going on in chapters 6 through 12 today. So much that we're not going to be able to cover even a fraction of what is there. So I hope you're reading it yourself, and I hope you take it apart sentence by sentence to find the gold that is in there. I have to admit that as your guide through these chapters today, I am a little overwhelmed by the richness that is presented to us. Just as an overview, Augustine addresses original sin. He wonders if there was a preexistence that remains unremembered before birth. And he tackles the gigantic question of speech and signs, a huge question that we in our own day are struggling to come to terms with, as shown by the works of Derrida, Wittgenstein, and several others. It is a comfort to me that Augustine prefaces this discussion by admitting that God might laugh at him in the course of the dialogue. And don't you know, many times when we're asking God questions, he laughs at us. Not an ugly laugh, but rather the loving laugh of a parent who is asked questions that are ridiculously simple to them, yet they also know that the child is nowhere near ready for the answers. So, let us prepare ourselves once again, not to receive answers, but rather to find the shape of our invisible God in the questions that are being asked. As we learned last week, sometimes the shape left behind by the lack of an answer is an answer within itself. Augustine says this, "I do not know where I came from, when I came here, that is, to this mortal life or living death." Do people ask these questions any longer? These are the most simple of questions, questions that all children should ask themselves. These are simple questions, and yet they seem to have been replaced with stupid and nonsensical questions like, what gender am I? Or how can I achieve my coveted victimhood status? This has a lot to do with children, unfortunately, raising more children. But we will get to that later if we have time. He hints at the dualistic nature of our reality. I have heard very crass and agenda-oriented people call the Bible a handbook for slave ownership. Well, have they read it? The only reason I can think of for saying such a horrible thing, besides the obvious agenda to undermine the morals of Scripture before anyone actually picks up the book to do their own research, to turn you against it so that you'll never approach it, is that they are spiritually blind as bats, or they have evil intent in their heart. Scripture does indeed tell a person how to survive and how to prosper as a slave. This is far from an approval or an endorsement of the institution of slavery, for crying out loud. In fact, Paul tells Onesimus, I hope I'm saying that name right, and his master. I know that doesn't go over well to even hear that out loud. We've been so conditioned to react. But Paul tells Onesimus and Onesimus's master that since they are both now Christians, they are both now brothers and should treat each other accordingly. Philemon tells the story of Onesimus running away and Paul sending him back home or back to his master. This, of course, is where evil people would stop telling you the story in order to get your back up and get you so angry with the Scriptures that you never actually avail yourself of the Scripture's wisdom. The story does continue, though. And in the pivotal verse, Paul tells the man's master, perhaps the reason he was separated from you for a little while was that you might have him back forever. No longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord. Now, does that sound like it supports slavery to you? The Bible communicates with real people who are in real and unfortunately sometimes horrible situations. It does not have the time to constantly talk about how bad the situation is, for there's an infinite number of bad situations. We are more than aware of how bad the situation is, aren't we? And of how horribly sin has corrupted the world around us, both our interiors and the exterior world in which we live. Why focus on what we already know when it can do something of so much greater value for us? It can teach us something. It can educate. The Bible isn't meant to community organize and get you hostile towards everyone around you. It is meant to give you salvation and give you peace with everyone around you. It can educate us on how to survive and find meaning in the most horrible of situations. Praise God. Yes, even in slavery, if you find yourself there. Which, just like the poor, according to Jesus, will always be with us until New Jerusalem arrives. To think this is an endorsement of pain and suffering or of an unjust institution is ridiculous or evil. There are scriptures about the disciples singing in prison, but this is not a story about how great prison is and why we should all be there or submit to it in unjust situations. The atheist God-haters and lying Satanists who have the mic like to invert stories and read them out of context so as to keep people so angry with the Bible and Bible-believing people that they never actually read it for themselves. The two hot topics of our day they may not even be the top two, but two of the hot topics of the day are racism and feminism. Healthy feminism, that is. They will find through an honest reading of the scripture that by following the law of Yahweh and by living the love of Christ, the overall trajectory of the Bible and of the scriptures is for the emancipation of all slaves and the respect and love of females as equal partners in the great work. He confesses that life is both a mortal life and a living death. Augustine confesses that. It is a mortal life. It is also a living death. The choice is up to you. The choice has always been up to you. I have watched people choose to be happy, and I have watched them succumb to misery willingly, almost as a badge of honor in some cases. Deuteronomy 11 starts by offering us a choice. It says, "Today I'm giving you the choice of a blessing or a curse." It really is that simple. God forgive me when I have chosen curses instead of blessings and joy. When I intentionally choose to live within the blessings of God, reality itself takes on a whole new dynamic. I find peace in everyday life, and I find purpose in adversity. Purpose can make all things bearable. I can sing in prison, and I can prosper as a slave, and I can hope and work towards a day when these conditions of sin, both mine and my captors, are dragged into the light of day, forgiven, and moved on from in glory. The immoral party is sick and twisted. They just are. They are cruel and they are totally heartless. They spend their days going from neighborhood to neighborhood with their community organizers, encouraging people to choose a curse. Choose victimhood. Choose to believe that you are helpless, that you are mindless and powerless. Choose hate. Choose fear. Choose envy. Choose to be angry. Choose to be depressed. Choose to be hostile. Choose to believe that your situation is someone else's fault. That is the modus operandi of the immoral party. They stir up trouble. They promise they will fix it. And once you become accustomed to the fact that they're not going to fix it, and once you become accustomed to the problems that they did not fix, they create new problems to keep you under their thumb. Like other forms of sin. If you don't believe me, read some statements from LBJ. Like other forms of sin, such as alcohol and strip clubs, the immoral party is sure to make money and ramp up the vote on the backs of useful idiots. Sorry, it's the truth. And people with absolutely no self-control and want people to approve of their lack of self-control. Pastor, what will happen to these injustices if the people say nothing? Well, I didn't say nothing, did I? I said choose blessings. There is the Obama, Hillary, and Anton LaVey way, and then there is the MLK, Gandhi, and Jesus way. You can burn down cities, or you can display the ugliness of it all by absorbing the evil deeds of others into yourself publicly, without paying fire with fire. And in so doing, you join with Christ in hanging it on the cross for all the world to see and be ashamed of, and to be ashamed by their own foul deeds. One way engenders hate, war, and curses, and is, even now, fomenting civil war here in the United States. The other way creates beauty from ashes, it fosters love, and it breaks the stone hearts of men for their fellow human beings and gives them a heart of flesh. Just because you choose blessings in slavery does not mean you lay down and take it or agree with it. It means that you fight it with light instead of fighting it with darkness. Love of the enemy instead of blind rage and hate. A warrior of light instead of a blind apostle. Augustine admits to us what every child knows, even if they cannot articulate it properly. He says, I grew indignant to find that my elders were not my slaves, only there to wait upon me, and I revenged myself upon them by fits of tears. I'm watching my children raise children now, and it's fun. It is quite interesting. I forgot all the little challenges and rebellions that children display in their early years. I say early years, but we seem to be living in a time when everybody who was given an award for just showing up have not been given the necessary training to overcome their toddler years successfully, unfortunately. They have not been trained how to be adults, not in the classic sense. The triggered get upset at the drop of a hat, while an adult was taught that sticks and stones break bones. Walk away from smart-mouth people that you don't agree with. The wine-sipping hate-mongers who got fired from Twitter are a prime example. They can cancel people all day long and feel great doing it and receive the pat on the back by the immoral party, but cancel them and watch the tantrum of the century unfold by a 40-year-old toddler for the whole world to see. The desire to lord it over others is a dreadful curse, the curse of Nimrod. The tyrant loves power over others most and hates submitting to the authority of wisdom or of others' authority even more. The healthy person and the faithful person are like the man that Jesus runs into who needs a child healed. Yeah, everyone knows the story if you've read the Gospels. Jesus says, "What do you want?" The man says, "Well, I want my child healed." Jesus says, "Where do you need me to go to do this?" I'm paraphrasing, of course. The man says, "Go? I don't need you to go anywhere." Jesus looks at him for further explanation. The man replies, "I have a job, Jesus. I'm an adult. I submit to authority, and I exercise authority, and I do it in the right measures. You are the authority, and I know it. Say the word, Captain. Say the word, boss, king, lord. You don't need to go anywhere." And Jesus looked around at all his followers and said of this goy Gentile, "This man has a job and responsibilities. I've never encountered such faith as this." Being able to live under proper authority while at the same time rebelling against improper authority in a proper way is part of the life that Jesus teaches us. Jesus did not submit himself to the authority of the temple or the authority of Rome when it overstepped its bounds and made legal in the temple what should have been illegal. And I am afraid to go here, for we are too susceptible to use violence willy-nilly when we aren't getting our way. But sometimes Jesus teaches us to weave the whip, and sometimes he teaches us to sheathe the sword and reattach the severed ear. Sometimes you submit to injustice to make a point, and sometimes you drive it out of the temple to make a point. I caution all believers, when in doubt, sheathe the sword. Better the road of the victim than the road of the tyrant. Jesus called the Pharisees to account in front of a crowd, but he also went to the slaughter as silent as a lamb. Only Jesus himself knows which is which, so make sure you have his precious nod before you act. And know your Bible so well that you begin to literally taste the difference between the two types of circumstances. Grow in your relationship and your walk with Jesus Christ so that you begin to be able to guess at his next move. He is the light unto your path. Much of this book is fascinating for its incredible awareness of the power of words and of signs. We learn to speak as children and really don't think much about the gift of speech or the incredible thing that it is. As Augustine grew, he became aware of the importance of making signs or words, or simply the importance of being able to communicate his soul to the soul of another. He writes, "By and by, I came to perceive my surroundings and conceived the wish to make my wishes known to others so that they could fulfill them. But in this I was frustrated, for my wishes were within me, while the bystanders were outside. And none of their senses enabled them to enter my soul." Colossians says, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." Ephesians says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Or Proverbs, "Sin is not ended by multiplying words, but the prudent hold their tongues." And of course, the most known and quoted statement is from James. "Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell." Right before that, James says that if a man can control the tongue, then he will be able to control the whole body. Now that's quite a promise, quite the statement. Isn't it interesting that Augustine equates our movement from non-communication to eloquent speaker with the simple desire to make demands of people and make our wants known? If you think about what he is saying, then our ability to speak, or more accurately, our desire to speak, is rooted in selfishness and craving. I'm not sure what linguists or neuropsychologists of today would say about that conclusion, but it is very interesting that someone of such mental caliber nearly 2,000 years ago, that they thought so. Makes sense to me. When we talk, we issue forth blessings or curses. Very little of what we say is ever neutral. I need statements might be neutral, while I want statements have the potential for either curse or blessing. You can build someone up, or you can tear someone down. You can speak life to a nation, or you can speak death to that nation. Boy, I'm tired of the death speakers. I have found in the course of my ministry that the more I or others talk and allow ourselves to talk freely without restraining the tongue, the more apt we are to enter into complaining. I have also learned that complaining is very close to choosing curse. The immorals hate this country, and they speak death about her every chance they get. They have been taught to do so by haters who clothe themselves in academia and tolerance, all the while hating everyone and everything but their own power, opinions, and desires, and their ability to manipulate you. I find Augustine's confession that he needed scolding but did not receive it because he was naive and ignorant. I found that helpful for how we interact with those raised without wisdom being taught in their homes. He writes, I deserved a scolding for the things I did at that age, but as I could not have understood if someone had given me a scolding, both custom and reason forbade it. It is a reminder to me to be slow to anger. We run into people constantly that are the age of an adult, but they were never trained to be adults. We told them that there was adult beverage and adult entertainment, and boy, did that lead them the wrong way. Things that we would have never given to the children because it would mess them up, we say is adult behavior. How sad. We failed as a society to pass on to the next generation the tools necessary to live and thrive as mature adults physically and spiritually. Instead, we have toddlers running the asylum. And we must remember that it was Gen X and the baby boomers who failed our children miserably. We sent them to public government schools, aka government re-education camps, that threw wisdom out the window decades ago. A populace that thinks will keep the immorals out of office. Can't have that, can we? Need to keep them stupid. We put them in daycares that live by the government's demand that wisdom and common culture are verboten topics. Can't upset the immoral by presenting them with morals, now can we? We allowed people who raised children as a paid job to instruct our children, our kids, instead of mothers and fathers who raised children out of love and in love taught them wisdom and kindness. We were childish enough to think that we could sacrifice our kids, literally sacrifice them for bigger houses, nicer cars, and more gadgets, and somehow thought that the children would turn out okay. We find ourselves in the unenviable situation of having to figure out how to minister and train generations of immature children that pride themselves on being selfish, self-important, awards for nothing, sex-addicted, tantrum-throwing toddlers who can vote and go to war and have a whole political party that is happily content with keeping them immature and stupid so that they can stay in power. You all saw what happened when one man got up and talked like an adult for the first time in decades. The woke had a conniption fit and showed the signs of adult derangement syndrome, all the while calling him mean names like Orange Man, while they would have had a literal meltdown if someone dared speak truth or mention their color, whether white or black. It is shameful. This is where we run into the age-old question. Should we treat sin, as Christians, should we treat sin and sinners as disease and diseased, or as rebellion and rebellious? I think that Augustine would advise us cautiously to treat our woke generation as though they were diseased with sin. Yes, they are rebels against God as surely as you and I were rebels against God, but they have not been taught properly and in many ways are like children that get a pass because they don't have the wisdom or power to overcome, not without being equipped, not without being told. Many churches, to keep numbers in the pews, have stopped demanding maturity from their believers and just compounded the social problems all around us that we have today. May God help or remove those ministers. Dear God, remove them. Speaking of children, and I must assume the immature adult as well, Augustine advises us this. We smile tolerantly at such actions, not because they are not faults or because they are only minor faults, but because they will pass with the passing of the years. He made that statement believing, like many of us, that parents, both pagan and Christian, were doing some kind of job with some kind of degree of success. Now we know that Christians didn't do their job, for the statistics are as bleak for the Christians as they are for the pagans. Pagans didn't do it because they don't really know what a pagan used to be. They just buy Wicca and New Age garbage and think that is pagan, when it is really just equivalent to the 80s metal culture. Might as well just go out and buy an AC/DC t-shirt, get it over with. And the Satanist and the immoral party were more than happy to step in to the American daycare. Well, they didn't step in, did they? They caused all of this intentionally. They didn't step into it. They made it happen and then stepped into it. They made it happen with their policies and their community organizing and their child sacrificing. And they did it in order to create a subclass of Neanderthals that will vote for them forever to keep the bread, the circuses, and the sex rolling. None of us are innocent. So let us teach the immature properly in their immaturity, and let us call a mature rebel exactly what he is, an immature rebel exactly what he is. I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard that the laws in the original colonies of the states were carried out with more wisdom than they are today. Well, I believe that. Our judicial system's a mess. Probably not that hard a feat when compared to what is happening today, where the judges only look at evidence that supports the immoral party. Thank God there's still a handful of honest ones scattered out there. Our future rides on you. I heard that if a poor man struggling to feed his family was caught stealing bread, then he would be forced to return the bread and spend a night or two in jail or in the stocks. But if a minister of the faith, who proclaims that he knows better every day and preaches it publicly every week, was caught stealing bread, then the penalty was much more severe. I heard death, but that seems harsh for bread, doesn't it? I believe that if Christianity is to do its work properly in the days to come, then we need to beg God for the wisdom to discern between the rebel, who is a rebel because they are infected with the sin disease, and the rebel, who is a full-on rebel in the full knowledge that they raise their fist towards God in hatred and insurrection. If I had to come up with an example, I think it would have to be that poor little boy who makes money for his parents by being dressed up like a little girl. And the Bible says that cross-dressing is a sin, period. Therefore, the boy is a sinner, just like everyone else, just like you and me, just like we are all short of Christ's blood. But aren't the parents the real problem? Isn't it wise to view the boy passionately as a victim of a disease, both his own and his parents' disease, while at the same time viewing the parents as vile rebels against God Most High? I know it's not a perfect example, for the parents themselves might be ignorant of the law of Christ as well. We have done a poor job of raising parents to be parents. But when we encounter situations like this, we need the wisdom to know when to withhold the stone, for who is without sin, and when to prepare the millstone for the necks of those that knowingly cause the weakest and youngest of us to stumble into hell unknowingly. It is a hard line, I understand that, but Christians must become the wise adults that Jesus wishes us to be. He laments that we aren't. The evil people are so wise in what they do. Why can't my followers be wise in what we do to help create a society that is healthy for everyone? As a short advertisement, young men, if no one is teaching you how to be a man in God's house, then I invite you to watch our series on Genesis. You can find it on the Orthopraxy Rumble page on the channel called Weekly Jumpstart. If you don't watch that, then please, young man, grab a Bible and read the Abraham saga near the beginning of the book. God trains Abram to be a man of faith and of courage, and the story will help you regain what was stolen from you by liars and tyrants and worse. Well, seeing as I'm pandering, hit that rumble and subscribe while you're thinking about it. It helps us reach more people, and we work hard to provide you with sound biblical teachings. I told you it was a daunting chapter, and every line of it made my mind spring to new thoughts and new ideas and new considerations. I hope the reading will do the same for you today. Let's turn to Book 1, Chapter 6. But let me speak in the presence of your mercy. Dust and ashes as I am, let me speak, for man would laugh at me. But it is to you I speak, and behold, you are mercy. You too may laugh at me, but you will turn again and have mercy upon me. This, Lord, and nothing else is what I want to say. I do not know where I came from, when I came here that is to this mortal life or living death. I do not know, but your tender mercies received me and comforted me. This much I have heard from my parents after the flesh, the Father from whom and the Mother in whom you formed me in time. I do not remember it myself. You welcomed me and comforted me with woman's milk. But it was not of themselves that my mother and my nurses filled their breast. Rather, it was you who through them gave me the right food for my early years. For you have so ordained it that even the least of your creatures should share in your riches. It was your gift, too, that I was satisfied with the amount you gave me, and that my mother and my nurses were happy to give me what you gave them. And though you had given them milk in abundance, yet they wanted to give it to me only in the quantities you had set for it. For it was good for them to give me what was good for me. Nor was it from them that I received the milk, but through them. For all good things come from you, O God, and from my God is my whole salvation. This I came to realize only later when you proclaimed it to me through the gifts you bestowed upon us, both without and within. But in those days I knew how to suck the breast and how to fall asleep when my body was comfortable and cry when it was not. And beyond this, I knew nothing. Later on, I learned to laugh, at first in my sleep, and then when I was awake. I have been told that I did this, and I believe it, as we can see other children do the same. But I do not remember my own early tears and smiles. And by I came to perceive my surroundings and conceived the wish to make my wishes known to others so that they could fulfill them. But in this I was frustrated, for my wishes were within me, while the bystanders were outside, and none of their senses enabled them to enter my soul. So I would thrash around with my arms and legs and make noises which I intended to be signs bearing some resemblance to my wishes. But such few poor signs I could make bore no true resemblance to them. And when my wishes were not granted, either because those around me could not understand me or because what I wanted would not have been good for me, I grew indignant to find that my elders were not slaves, only there to wait upon children. And I revenged myself upon them by fits of tears. My own experience of babies has been enough to teach me that this is typical behavior. Without ever having known me, these babies have taught me that I too was like that, more so even than the nurses who did know me. My childhood has died once and for all, and yet I live on. But you, Lord, who live forever and whom nothing ever dies, from the beginning of the ages, before anything that can even be called before, you exist. You are God and Lord of all your creation. In you stand unmoved the causes of all things transient. In you remain unchanged the sources of all things that know change. In you lives the eternal reason behind all things, irrational and bounded by time. Have mercy on me, O God, I pray, and in your loving kindness speak to this unhappy creature of yours. Tell me this, did my childhood itself follow on from some previous time in my life? already dead when my childhood began? Was that stage of my life the time that I spent in my mother's womb? I have been told something of that time, and I know how women look when they are expecting, but what came even before that, O God, my sweetness? Did I exist in some form and in some place? There is no one else who can tell me this. My father and my mother cannot tell me, and I cannot rely on the experience of others or on my own memory. Or do you laugh at me when I ask such questions and bid me praise you and confess myself before you for what I do know? And I do confess to you, O Lord of heaven and earth, I praise you both for my hidden beginnings and for my infancy, though I do not remember either. But through your gifts, a man can gain from the example of other babies some idea of what he himself was like, and can even take the word of ordinary serving women on many details of his childhood. For even at that age I existed, I was alive, and as my infancy drew to its close, I tried to find signs in which to convey my feelings to others. From where could such a living creature come, if not from you, O Lord? For who could be the craftsman of his own creation? Is there some source from which we can draw the power to exist and to live apart from your creative power at work in us? For to you, Lord, there is no difference between life and existence. Your supreme existence and supreme life are one and the same. You are supreme and unchanging. Today is never completed in you, and yet is completed in you. For in you exist all these things also. They would have no way of passing on, were they not contained within you. And since your years are unfailing, your years are this today, many days of our life and of our fathers have passed through this today of yours, receiving from it their due measure and their very being. But there are yet as many more still to pass the same way, having their being and their end within it. But you are the same. In this today, you have made all things that happened yesterday and ever before, and will make all things that will happen tomorrow and ever after. Does it matter to me if someone fails to understand? Let him rejoice to ask, what is this? Let him rejoice even so, and let him love to discover you and not discover this, rather than to discover this and not discover you. Hear my prayer, O God. Woe to the sins of man. It is man who says this, and you have pity upon him, for you yourself made him, but not the sin that is in him. Who will recall to me the sins I committed while yet an infant? For there is none that is free from sin in your sight, not even a baby whose life upon earth has lasted but one day. Who will recall my sins? Is there any child now living, however tiny, in whom I do not see the things I did myself yet cannot remember? How then did I sin at that age? Was it by clinging to the breast and wailing? For if I did that now, not that is clinging to the breast, but clinging in the same way to food more appropriate to my years, people would quite rightly laugh at me and take me to task for it. Likewise, I deserve a scolding for the things I did at that age, but as I could not have understood if someone had given me a scolding, both custom and reason forbade it. For as we grow up, we weed such habits out of ourselves and throw them away. But I have never known any wise farmer, when weeding his plot, to throw good plants out with the bad. But perhaps it was actually good, for a while, that I should cry and seek even things that it would have been dangerous to give me. It was good that I should be outraged to find that adults were not there to wait upon children, and that I should thrash out and do all I could to hurt my elders, both my own parents and many others, who were so much wiser than I, when they did not obey my orders, knowing it would not be at all safe to do so. Children are innocent only because they do not yet have any physical strength. Their minds are not innocent. I know for myself what a jealous child is like. I have seen one who was too young to speak, but as he watched another baby being fed at the same breast, his face turned white with resentment. This is all common knowledge. Mothers and nurses claim to have all sorts of remedies to cure their charges of these faults. But is it really innocence for one child to begrudge another the rich stream of milk that Is there one shared source of life on which they both depend utterly for their food? We smile tolerantly at such actions, not because they are not faults or because they are only minor faults, but because they will pass with the passing of the years. All well and good, but we would not put up with them so philosophically were we to detect them in an older person. You then, O Lord my God, who gave me my infant life and body, who equipped that body with senses, who fastened together its limbs, who molded its fair form, who instilled in it all the impulses of a living creature needs to maintain and preserve its oneness, you, O God Most High, bid me praise you in these things and confess before you and make music to your name. For you are God the Almighty and good, and would be so if this were all you had done, although no one else can do even these things. You are the one God from whom all things receive their allotted end, God most lovely, who shaped all things in loveliness. And by your law you set all things in their due place. I do not remember my infancy. I can only take other people at their word and make some guess as to how I spent it from looking at other children. And though this guesswork is quite reliable, I would be none the less reluctant to consider that life to be of a piece with the one I now live in this world. Rather, it is like the life I led while still in my mother's womb, for both are now wrapped in the mists of oblivion. But if I was conceived in iniquity, and my mother fed me on sin in her womb, then, Lord, at what time or what place was I, your servant, ever innocent? But I will say no more of my infancy. What does it matter to me now, seeing as I cannot recall any trace of it? May God give us the wisdom to speak life and to see ourselves, both what we know of ourselves and what we guess took place in the mists of oblivion. May His mercy encourage us to choose blessings. May His long suffering make us tender to those infected with the disease of sin. And may His fatherhood cause us to raise our children to be adults and demand that those around us grow up as well. This is no small thing that we do, and I do not in any way claim to have the answers perfected in myself. Jesus has the answers, and we need to have a relationship with Him, which is strong enough to shine light on our footsteps and on the footsteps that have gone before us to make the crooked places straight. I confess that Jesus Christ is King. Hail to the King.